Hello. It has been a while since I last checked in with progress updates on my Marienburg Empire mercenaries army, so I thought that it was high tide I did so. There has been a little bit of painting, plenty of collecting, a little bit of playing, and a fair amount of writing. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today it's time for my latest Marienburg diary. Before we get started, let's just catch everybody up on what exactly this project is. So I am making a Marienburg mercenary empire army for Warhammer Fantasy. I want it to be usable in 6th, 7th, 8th, and the old world editions of Warhammer Fantasy. But I really want it to reflect the diversity of Marienburg, the great independent port city of the old world. It doesn't belong to Bretonnia, but it also doesn't belong to the Empire either. It belongs only to itself, and because of its incredible trade and that route through it into the old world, you see denizens of every nation and civilization in the civilized Warhammer world. I've never collected an Empire army, so I wanted this to be really special, to reflect the diversity of that great city, to have ogres and dwarves and halflings and humans and elves in the mix. Now, that's quite complicated when it comes to the different rule systems and the different armies that you can really build for those classic games, but we're going to see how it goes. The other thing I wanted to make sure was that it reflected the history of Citadel miniatures. But before we explore that, let's just cover where things are so far. High on the inspiration from Marienburg, I've started putting together this Empire army with all of that diversity in mind. And the driving force behind the story of it is Ponsard Trudot. Ponsard is the last scion of a faded noble family, once rich and famed for their sparkling wines, but now all but broke, their land dried out, and their wine considered cheap swill. Whilst Ponsard's new wife has set about restoring the family vineyards to their former glory, this noble son is gambling what little remains of his family's fortune and his life on glory of another kind, the glory that can only be found on the battlefields of the old world. There were two key aspects to my plan for assembling the army. I wanted to bring together miniatures and units from all different parts of Citadel history. Pre-Slaughter stuff, early Warhammer Fantasy stuff, 40k, Age of Sigmar, Necromunda stuff, right the way through to everything that's available today for the old world and that hopefully will be coming back soon as well. It was really about getting together lots of my favourite miniatures in one place and calling it an army. And the other key aspect of it was that I wanted this mercenary menagerie to be something that I assembled and painted myself. Now, that's not that remarkable for most people, but for me, a person who has been infamous throughout my gaming career for just fielding naked metal and plastic figures with no paint whatsoever, to the eternal frustration of my opponents and friends, this is a tall order. It's not something that comes naturally to me, and you will have seen in other videos that I've done, it's been quite a struggle, and that struggle continues, but we'll cover that shortly. You can see some of the pictures of the whole army and the individual units on my Instagram, but we're going to go through some of the key units and where they are right now. Let's start with the big lads. As you can see, I now have a 5th member of my Ogre mercenary unit, the 5-sided coin. I wanted to have something that was like a standard bearer for this unit, and I've seen somewhere online a very cool Ogre banner bearer, which actually featured a sort of man-o'-war scale galleon on the top of the banner pole. I've not been able to find the specific one, but if you do find it, please post below because it's fantastic. I didn't think I would be able to recreate it, but I did think it was cool and very Marienburg appropriate. Instead of that, I went for something far simpler for me to do. I took the Cities of Sigmar Ogre with a gunner sitting on a mast attached to its back and used that kit in its entirety, more or less, but I added, instead of the gunner, a halfling archer. Lore-wise, I really like this idea that it's kind of been assembled in the field. These Ogre mercenaries and some halfling mercenaries have got together and tried to solve a particular problem. That problem being, how can you scout ahead as you're walking through all of these swamps and marshes out in the wastelands? but that would require me to have some halfling mercenaries as well, right? Well, yes, and fortunately, Lumping Kroup's halfling archers are an absolute favourite of mine from the old Dogs of War range. These were sculpted by the incredible Colin Dixon. For the purposes of my army, this is not going to be the actual Lumping Kroup and his Regiment of Renown. Instead, these are halfling archers who have been hired by Ponsard in the back alleys of Marienburg. I've not quite settled on a name or some story for these guys just yet, because I really want it to be a fun, special bit of storytelling, so I'm going to work on this one and come back to you. At the literal opposite end of the height spectrum, you may well remember that I was recently sent a Marauder Giant by friend of the channel, Jason. I've now assembled him, which required a little bit of minor leg surgery as he was leaning quite far back and I didn't want him to take a seat during the heat of battle. I did attempt to pin the limbs, but then I had some trouble working out exactly where the pins could go because the entire body is hollow inside. Fortunately, it didn't really turn out that they needed to have pins because the pieces have huge tabs and they fit together quite snugly. That said, as you can see, there are some areas around the shoulders where I think I'm going to have to apply some green stuff. Now, of course, I should have done this before doing an undercoat of the miniature, but I wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing and just autopiloted straight to the spray can. In any case, I love this miniature. I am so glad that they're bringing it back for the old world, and it really fills me with hope that there's going to be other similar classics making their way into other armies as things progress. In L'Armée Trudot, I've decided to call this giant Chanticleer. He is a lute-playing, Bugman beer-swilling giant who would prefer to be sat on a hillside somewhere watching the clouds and just having a lovely time. But unfortunately, even giants have to pay their bills, so every now and again he begrudgingly accepts a mercenary contract, and because Ponsard is really trying to keep costs down, he's gone for any old giant that he could find, and that's how Chanticleer and Ponsard have ended up in league. Another brand new addition to my lineup is this unit of mounted Imperial Pistoliers. Of course, I've not assembled them yet, but I have stripped them, and I will be putting these together hopefully soon. I've mentioned before now that I used to live near a pub that was called the Moss Trooper, and I've always liked the image of mounted skirmishers that are out in the wilds with a bit of a roguish kind of feel. I didn't want any heavy cavalry in L'Armée Trudot proper, as it didn't really feel like it fit into a Marienburg mercenary force. Why would there be these strict regimented knights acting as mercenaries? Plus, if you're going out into the wasteland, heavily armoured knights are probably the last thing that you want to employ. But I can absolutely see a small unit of light cavalry acting as outriders for this army. So, Pistoliers fit the bill perfectly. On the subject of basing and movement trays, I actually managed to get hold of a couple of examples of textured, sculpted bases. I purchased these wharfside or deck top scenic bases from a seller on Etsy called Beneath Your Toes. I like the designs and I think they look good. They have all of this cool rope and damage and trapdoor texture, which is really fun. But I also ended up having a bit of trouble managing to find spots for some models to fit on them. There's just too much debris on each base to be able to fit some of the more awkward guys. So for that reason, I then went and ordered some more simple deck-style bases from Fenris Games. These are really nice textures, and there's no debris to get in the way of the more awkward models. I'm going to link both sellers down below. I'm pleased with both sets of bases. Obviously, there's a bit of a height disparity, which isn't ideal, but I think it will work overall in the army because they'll all be painted in the same way. I also picked up some MDF movement and spacer trays so that my infantry on 20mm bases could rank up correctly. Unfortunately, I forgot that in at least one of my infantry units, I've included someone on a monster base, which means that they don't really fit in with the rest of the unit on these spacer trays. I think I might need to look at whether or not I can get something bespoke made up. I'd also really like to get something that allows a staggered monster base for my 5-sided coin regiment, because these ogres just do not rank up together. And because of the way that I've put some of the miniatures onto some of the bases, I've also put them at these weird diagonal angles, so they're not looking at the enemy at all. It's fine, and that's what a lot of old Warhammer plastics used to look like as well. Everyone was looking off in a diagonal direction. Not the end of the world, but I almost feel like it would be cool to get like diagonally ranked base trays that we could then put all of these guys who are facing off in different angles, so they're all facing towards the enemy. Again, it's something that would be required sort of bespoke creation and probably would look rubbish. So, in fact, forget that whole idea. Let's move on. Right, painting. Now, this is my ongoing challenge. I talked last time about a method that I was going to put in place where I would set up my painting station and have it ready the night before I was then going to do painting the next day. And I blocked out time each week to do the painting. That was a good idea, I think, and may yet still work. Unfortunately, as with these things, I moved all of the blocked dates around because I had deadlines, I had other stuff coming up. It was the run up to Christmas. I had loads of content that I was working on, and I just ended up falling out of the habit almost immediately. So I don't think it didn't solve the problem. I have painted a couple of things. I've gone back and resprayed the 5-sided coin, the ogres, because I'd hardly put any paint on them, but I just wasn't happy immediately with the direction it was going. What I have painted as a complete unit, almost, because I forgot that there was an extra miniature required for the unit to fit, is Mariona List's Free Company. Now, she is the Kislevite vodka smuggler, and this unit is made up of lots of different Marienburgers from Mordheim, and all sorts of different miniatures as well. I am not that happy with what I've done here, and I will tell you why. So this unit is led by Mariona List, and I've used Necromunda's Lady Hera as the miniature for her. She is then joined by all of the Mordheim miniatures and some old Citadel feudals. There's a single puritanical dark elf, her griffhound called Gref, and her curmudgeonly advisor, Karamazov, who is also a Necromunda model. If you've seen any of the Tale of Four Gangers Necromunda series that I am part of on the Fueled by Chaos channel, then you will have seen the Ogre gang that I've painted for that. I was surprised by how much I actually liked what I did there. I basically used as few colours as possible, centred around Deadly Nightshade, to give them this unusually sort of dark blue skin tone. I wanted to do something similar for this unit. Not for the skin tone, but just using the Deadly Nightshade and as few other colours as possible. Unfortunately, because I used a Zenithal of black and grey, these guys are super dark. You can't really make out any of the colours that I've added in a lot of the photography. The Deadly Nightshade mostly fades into the black, and any other highlights like browns and silvers just get completely lost. I've had some good suggestions from different folk. One person suggested that a strong white dry brush might bring them to life a bit more, and some people have said that using some simple flesh tones to colour in the faces and the hands would do wonders to make it look like a more finished and complete model. So I think I'm probably going to try one of those approaches rather than just stripping the entire unit, but truthfully, I felt like I really let myself down on these guys, and the experiment just didn't work out. It's an odd one, really, because although I know that this is just a bit of paint and it's not that serious, I also really felt quite disappointed. I think part of my issue was that I really hated painting those Ogrins. I just did not enjoy the act of painting, which, again, I've talked about, this is just, it's not a fun experience for me, mostly because I don't really know how to do it, and I don't feel comfortable, and I don't like the results I get. But as I worked through those Ogrins, I still didn't enjoy it, but then I got to that final wash, I think it was Nuln oil that I just put all over them, and all of a sudden it felt like the entire thing came together, and I actually quite liked the result that I got. It kind of worked for this sort of sci-fi, unusual unit of Ogrins that I'd put together. I had hoped, as I progressed through this unit in my Warhammer army, that something similar might happen. There would be that final moment, that final shade or wash that would be like an epiphany, and I would go from hating the process and hating what I'd done to this unit to, oh wow, it's come together and it looks really good now, or at least I can be happy enough with them. And it just didn't happen. So I'd kind of built up this expectation that I was going to surprise myself and be okay with what I'd done. And then, no, it was just still something that just didn't look right, didn't look finished, and I ran out of time to get them done. So that was kind of just a bit of a dissatisfying experience for me. But I don't want to let that hold me back from doing any more painting. I just know that, again, I need to get more serious and sort of try it in a different way, I think. So I've got some stuff set up. Some friends and I are going to do some painting together. I'm very much looking forward to that because I hope that will make it to a sort of more interesting dynamic as I do the painting. It stops being quite a solo, kind of hateful experience. This is too strong a word, but not an enjoyable experience, and becomes a more social, interesting thing where I can ask for advice and we can kind of do it as we go. Plus, I was able to use this unit in a series of battles at Warhammer World, which was tremendous fun. I got the chance to field most of the Marienburgers as a warband in a special Mordheim mini-campaign that my friend Stu from the Miniature Realms channel had organised. Me and Dan, Stu's co-host for the Hobby Hour podcast, got together to fight across Stu's genuinely amazing Bretonnian Fortress board. Seriously, it is awesome. It's so full of character. It was just amazing to spend time playing on this board. I've linked the video that Stu has made about building the actual thing. It is well worth a watch because it's so impressive. Over a series of missions, my Marienburgers and Dan's Skaven were trying to infiltrate the fortress because we wanted to recover a Nehekaran artifact of power that the Bretonnian guards didn't even realize was hidden within the walls. It was a fantastic set of games, and even though I was soundly outplayed at pretty much every turn, I got very lucky in the final mission and stole a last-minute victory. And one of the really nice things was that despite the fact I don't really like the paint jobs, on the board, the entire unit looked really cool. It just sort of worked in the gameplay. So it's not all bad. And that campaign is not the only thing that I've got to thank Stu for, because Stu is currently assembling my very wonky Marienburg-class landship and painting it for me. From the sounds of things, it has already been a bit of a challenge to put together, so I am really glad that I've left it in the hands of someone with all of the experience and the skill to do it really well. I am very much hoping that Stu makes a video about his process, because I genuinely think it will be super fascinating. Plus, I still have a second, currently crewless landship that I'm going to try and tackle myself one day, and I would love to get some lessons from Stu to sort of see how he approached it, what he did to solve these weird problems of the warped bits of all of the resin, and then how he went about actually painting it too. And Stu is actually not the only amazing painter to really help me out with this project. If you watched my painting phase appearance at Christmas, then you will have seen that the mighty Chris Peach gave me an amazing gift. Peachy scratch-built a miniature to represent the noble Ponsard Trudot, and he painted it for me in the colours of the family Trudot. This was an incredibly generous gesture from Peachy, and I am indebted to him for the magnificent job that he did. I sent over a few ideas for what I wanted Ponsard to look like, including an absolute deal-breaker. He had to have a huge hat with a big feather, like some kind of musketeer. And, well, look at this guy. He is so damn cool. Ponsard is in the army, he's ready to do battle, and he is ready to lead his unit of Vinekeepers to glory. So what is left for me to add to this already ridiculous force? Well, I had liked the idea of putting some flagellants into the army, but I didn't have a good concept for how to do so. It just didn't feel like religious zealots would be serving the cause of Ponsard Trudot. Until, at least, Ben M on my Discord suggested a really cool idea for how to do it. What if these are not flagellants and religious zealots, but indebted prisoners who have been marshalled into battle to pay off their debt? The leader of the unit is a warden in charge of keeping them in line, which would give me an excuse to use the Cawdor headsman model from Necromunda. It is quite a bleak bit of background, and it might go against Ponsard being a good guy, but it also feels like it fits into the moral grey of Warhammer, and adds more to that sense that Ponsard is really scrimping and saving. He can't afford to get top-of-the-line mercenaries at every corner. That's why he's using criminals like Mariona List, a giant who doesn't really want to be there, and some poor souls who need to fight their way back out of debt. I also, of course, have the Barda Gargoyles, and a unit of Dwarf Pirate Slayers, but I haven't based either of those yet. I've got the Pirate White Dwarf, who still needs assembling, and I find myself still on the fence about whether to stick with the Cursed City character of Octron Glimscry, or go with my original plan of using Torgilius to represent the descendant of Barda, who actually summoned those gargoyles. Both are suitably creepy miniatures, but I just don't know which one feels right for this gargoyle summoning demonologist just yet. I also have some more greatswords, some Nuln Ironsides, and Manan's Blades to assemble, but I think that's more or less all of the infantry, with one exception. There is a part of me that wants to do a unit of crossbowmen using some later Citadel metals alongside some plastics from Battlemasters and HeroQuest, but I'm not 100% sure on this idea just yet. So that's the collecting and the assembling and the painting moving forward, albeit slowly. What about the story? I've been writing a series of chapters of The Widow Trudot. This is the story about Ponsard's wife, who is back home whilst Ponsard is leading this mercenary force into the swamps. She has become widowed because Ponsard has presumably died during this adventure, but she is still trying to restore the family's vineyards. This is a series that I am releasing in written form on my website. The second part is coming soon, and next week I am going to be reading part 1 here on the channel, so keep an ear out for that. I'm still working on all of the peripheral stuff that I mentioned at the outset of this project as well. So for each unit, I'm going to be writing a short story and background, and I'm going to be compiling all of that into a lovely roster document that I will be sharing. And of course, I need army lists. I've been working on one for 6th edition. I'm also working on one now for Warhammer the Old World. I have taken a brief look at the Old World's forces of fantasy, and for the most part, the Empire units are all present and correct. The core options work pretty much as you would expect. There's no issue using greatswords or free companies. The Nuln Ironsides and Manan's Blades can just be regular units as well. The landship can operate as a steam tank if my opponent allows. But my bigger issues are going to be with the more unusual choices that I've taken. Pirate Slayers, well, they could just be a unit of allied dwarves, I suppose, but it's probably a little bit trickier for halfling archers, or a giant, or flying gargoyles. So I think I'm going to need to get a little bit more creative with the Old World systems and lists to try and find something that works for me and which feels right, and which my opponents are comfortable with as well. Later in the year, I will also be sharing videos about the creation of a grand storage box for the army. It's supposed to represent a sort of champagne carrying box, but it's a big wooden vacuum cleaner box from the 50s that I'm going to try and theme up and make it feel really like a Trudot wine box. And I also want to make a piece of terrain for the army using a Playmobil pirate ship. But we will get to that in time. I'm sure it will be terribly embarrassing, but I am looking forward to it. Oh, and before we get to the middle of the year, I will be releasing another Fantasy Battle Scenario pack. This one is going to be inspired by the Marienburg force and their march into the marshes of the wastelands and the denizens that they encounter there. So keep your one good eye peeled for that when it releases. If you want to see what I mean by Fantasy Battle Scenario Pack, then you can go right now and download my existing one, Dead King Wenceslas. And I've included a link in the description below so you can see exactly what I mean. It's full of really cool art and I think a fun story as well. I'm really sorry that there's not more painted miniatures to share here. I have been struggling as ever with some of the stuff I've talked about here and just the general getting to paint stuff. It's just so unnatural to me. I'm still fighting it. I don't want this to become like a knock-down, drag-out battle for the rest of the year. I think if I just really cannot get into the feel of it and I don't get comfortable with it, then, you know, I will look at other alternatives. And I've reached out to some people and I'm having some conversations about other ways to progress things with the army as well, should I get to that place. So it's not going to end up in a bad, anxiety-ridden nightmare or anything like that. It's just, I would love to overcome it somehow. I just don't know that I'm going to get there just yet. One thing I have thought about is I've got some skeletons that I need to paint. I've got some Skaven that I need to paint. They feel like they'll be way simpler, and they might just help me get through some of these initial teething problems with getting back into the sort of rhythm of painting. So I might leave the Marienburg stuff for the time being from a painting perspective, try some of those other projects, share the progress on those, continue to collect my Marienburg army, continue to write the stories and all that good stuff, but not actually get too hung up on the painting. So we'll see how that goes in the next Marienburg diary. I'm going to try and make these more frequent this year because I really want to show the progress, and I also want to get this army into battles. I want to put them on the table and be fighting with them. So I want to tell that story too. Hopefully, we'll get some progress soon, and I'll be able to play some games with them as well. If you want to support the work I do here on the channel, please feel free to join my Patreon, to join my Ko-fi, or to check out my Discord. Links to all of those are down below. I also have an affiliate link for Element Games, so if you need to buy any hobby supplies, you can click on that, and it really supports me too. That's down in the description as well. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. When I ordered these, I didn't realize that they're actually not together. I hadn't read the description. It's totally on me. It's my fault. But I tried gluing them. I put my wood glue on. I put a stack of books on top, and I thought, right, that's good. And then obviously the first one that was done was like skew-if all over the shop, rock solid, absolute nightmare. I basically don't have any skills when it comes to assembling anything at all. But we'll get there.